Didn't stand a chance.
Don't say that.
We ain't got a chance.
The wrong committee. Isn't it? Are you ready for it? The Public Safety Committee meeting is now called to order. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Bosley.
Present.
Alderman French. Present. Alderman Vaccaro.
Present.
Alderman Cone.
Present.
Alderman Carter.
Present.
Alderman Coulter.
Here.
Alderwoman Spencer.
Present.
Alderwoman Green.
Present.
Chairman Kennedy.
Here.
9 present. We have a quorum.
Okay, with the quorum, we have four bills in front of us that are all sponsored by Alderwoman Baringer. Is there a particular, I know we have just had them listed 51 through 54. Is that fine?
54.
You want to start with 54? Okay, then let's take up 54 at this time. Alderwoman Baringer.
First of all, I would like to thank the chair for putting together this meeting so quickly. I also want to thank all the committee members for coming out. I know it takes a lot of your time, and I appreciate it. I value your time, and I very much appreciate this hearing. I also want to let you know that this didn't just happen overnight, what we're looking at today, but rather I have been meeting with different entities to look at addressing how we can get more police officers on the streets of the city of St. Louis. And while there are many ways we could look at to raise those funds, it was whittled down to the ones that I'm going to present to you today. And that's why I want to make sure that you don't think that it was just put together yesterday. We've been working on it, and like you as an alderman, there were certain ones that I just didn't feel would work. So the very first thing I want to start with is Board Bill number 54. And if you look at Board Bill 54, it is establishing a crime reduction and professional policing fund. May I ask, did you all receive the summary on all the bills? I just want to make sure everyone had the summary. Okay. And we did this because we want to, when we decide, and if we decide today, to have the bills that will come after this, that we would have a designated fund that would clearly say where the money from the fees raised would go to, that would be utilized. And that's why I've asked that we start with Board Bill 54, which is the Crime Reduction and Professional Policing Fund. So I want everyone to know that this needs to be established in order to move forward with the other bills.
Were you completed with that?
Yes.
We can move on with some questions on Board Bill 54. Alderman Bosley?
I want to hear what everybody else is saying first.
Okay, we'll come back to you then.
Thank you.
Alderman French?
Thank you. Alderwoman, I had a question. In Section 2, it describes the purposes and the use of the fund. Funds maintained in the Crime Reduction and Professional Policing Fund shall be used only to pay the costs related to hiring more and retaining police officers, investing in programs to prevent and reduce crime, and training police officers in community policing, customer service, bias recognition, mental health, and policing in a diverse city. So that's pretty broad. I think most folks were under the impression that this was going to go specifically hiring new police. And my concern is that the last time we passed a sales tax increase, I think it was a sales tax increase, to pay for new policing, under the old police board, they used the bulk of that to pay for pay raises, and we didn't get the actual police officers, the new police officers we were promised. That this language is so broad, are you concerned that that could happen again and that the money could go towards things that, well, other than new police officers?
That's a very good question. And I, too, was looking at this language and saying that to myself. So in doing my due diligence of understanding and making sure the funding is spent correctly, or as we stated it should be, the one thing that we all agree on, because we were here just a week ago and we all want more police officers, is the number one priority of this funding is to have police officers. But in getting officers, more officers, there's other things that need to come along with those officers, one being the training, okay? One being the fact that if we do have more officers, and when we talk about retaining, that would be less stress on the ones who are out there on the street right now going to more violent calls. And so let's say we get to the point where we have hit the 160 mark, and we have enough police officers on the street, then we would say, well, then the funding, where might it be spent in a different way? We also don't have any funding set aside for some of these that already exist. When we talk about the bias recognition, we don't do anything to work with police officers on mental health, and we all know that a lot of some of the calls the police officers go on, it is because there's someone who does need some assistance in the realm of their mental health state. So that's why we put those in there. But if you want me to specifically address prior legislation, did you want me? Because I definitely want to make sure we get that out front and discuss that. And I did ask Paul Payne to discuss how the funds were the last time through the Prop S and how we have spent them.
Okay.
So if you would allow that, I'll have Paul come up.
Absolutely. I just don't want us to repeat the same mistakes, so maybe he can.
Correct. And I agree.
Describe the last mistake.
Okay, let's have him come forward.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the Public Safety Committee. Yeah, I would, as the Alderwoman had expressed, she had a question about how traditional, or how the funds were spent on public safety sales tax fund. If you remember that ordinance as passed, it had a number of accounts that were specifically addressed, saying with certain amounts to go certain places. Half-cent sales tax produces between $17.5 to $19 million per year. This year was a good year. You'll see at this year's budget, it's about $19 million. In previous years, it had dipped below $17 million. So there's fluctuation there in terms of how our sales tax proceeds come in. But there were certain accounts established when that ordinance passed. The two biggest single accounts were fire pensions and police pensions. So of that, let's say 18 million, each got $5.5 million per year. That came off the top. Then you got $1 million for crime prevention. So that was budgeted, and that's budgeted each year in the Department of Public Safety as $1 million. Now, part of that's being used for drug courts, but that's where that is. And the remaining three accounts, two of those were for pay raises for police and firefighters, and then the final account was for additional police officers. If you look, and this is online, and this is in this year's budget, if you look at the budget summary on Fund 1123, it sort of itemizes all those different uses. Those were what was specified in the ordinance, and that's where the money has gone. Mm-hmm. So again, you can see the history. In FY14, we had a budget of just under $17 million. This year's budget was $17.7 million, and next year's budget is $19 million. So again, as sales tax comes in or doesn't come in, it'll fluctuate from year to year. But we follow that allocation based on the ordinance.
But in that ordinance, under 4, section 4 there, it said that specifically that it would establish new officer positions which would result in a police force of approximately 1,400 officers. I mean, that was what the language
Correct.
Specifically said.
Right.
And we're nowhere near that number right now, right?
That's correct. Well, yeah, and I'll address that. One thing you have to realize when you're establishing a special fund is that you are saying, okay, we've got additional monies that we're adding to general revenue. So let's, for sake of purposes, say general revenue budget, police, $150 million. Let's not include pension for a minute. So that's $150 million. Then we identify another $5 million to add on to that $150, and we will buy X number of police officers. Depending on the source, and first of all, on some of these sources, the cost of the police officers will go up each year. So depending on what you've used as your funding source, the amount of officers you can buy with that additional money will either stay the same or decline, depending on the growth. But also, what happens as in FY08 or in FY09 when you're in a recession and the $150 million starts going down? It's mathematically impossible to guarantee a funding level of $5 million for a base budget of $150. make no mistake, you're better off had you not had the additional funding, but you can't guarantee that level with a decline in the base budget. I mean, it's just the magnitude of the base budget overwhelms the additional funds. And if you've got a decline in revenue, as you know we did, and I think it was 9 and 10, actually, FY9, you can't get there. So what I'm saying is, by creating the special fund, you are targeting an improvement in staffing and all, but it's by no means the guarantee that if you have another recession or ever, everything else stays status quo. The magnitude of the budget is such that you can't maintain that in those situations.
So then that would also suggest that even if we pass these 4 bills, it would not guarantee us 160 new officers.
I would say, depending on what the future holds, no. I would let me say this. Right now, let's say you've, depending on the sources, and I don't know, I'm guessing it's about 130 based on the sources of the ordinance I've seen. You already know that the auto license tax and the other are pretty flat in terms of revenue. Okay, so they're pretty static. So as the cost of a police officer goes up 2 or 3% each year, then what can you do? Well, it might fund 130 this year. It would fund 127 next year. Maybe it's 124 the following year. Now, we are currently in the 6th year of economic expansion. Most projections suggest that this year should probably be a pretty good year. So let's say that's 7 years. Somewhere between the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to get another recession. So if the 150, the general fund budget, starts shrinking again, how is it that you're able to say this 5 million or 6 million can guarantee that which is based on 150 million? But again, that you sort of jump off that bridge when you get there, but there is that bridge up ahead, I mean, eventually. So, but that's why you have the Ways and Means Committee and and the Public Safety Committee to address those things. When they arise, you have to make those decisions based on the priorities that when they occur.
So given that, isn't it true then that if we expand the uses of this fund beyond specifically just 160 new officers, that increases the chance that we won't have enough money over the long term to be able to sustain just those 160 officers?
Sure, that would be true, yes.
Okay, all right. And the other thing I'd bring up about the Prop S that we passed, one of the things that we talk about almost every year down here is that 2 of the selling points that most folks, I think, voted in favor of this thing for at the time was the additional police officers, getting to 1,400 officers, which we never got to, and the $1 million specifically going towards crime prevention programs in communities.
Yes.
And as you know, we have never gotten the full $1 million.
I think you have, but but I understand what you're saying. I think there were a couple of years where.
Okay.
I understand. And
I've been here.
Yeah. Well, when we get to discussing budget, I can sort of put that into context. But yeah, we're getting, and I don't want to divert from the topic, but we're getting to the point where we can get recurring revenues to equal recurring expenditures. We're getting closer. We're not there yet, but we're getting close.
I guess my point, though, is that if we put these things in front of the voters and we are specific, I mean, this is what folks are looking for. They want to make sure that the new tax is going to go towards what they want it to go towards. And so we put specific language in there, and then we don't make that happen.
Well, you make that happen initially, but then the issue becomes how do you, when such things as, okay, the cost of police, okay, let's say you do this and you got 130, 160, whatever officers, and they go up, the cost of having those officers next year goes up 2 or 3%, but your revenue is flat. So now it's, you have to, I mean, you have to realize what you are doing and what you aren't doing. What you are doing is giving more money to hire more additional officers, and you would definitely have more for more officers without it.
But there's a way around that. I mean, the smart thing to do would be create this fund, you put enough, all the revenue from this new tax go into it. You make sure it's enough to, at the very least, pay for the additional officers in the first year, and then you leave the rest in there to account for these down years in the future. But what we always do is any fund, we tap it, and we always tap the remainder, and we don't leave enough in there for the
Yeah,
for the
I can
down
tell
years.
you, with the Fund 1123, which is the public safety sales tax, the issue there was, the sales tax never met that original number. It was, I think the original number was 18, and then immediately we go into recession, and it dropped down to 17. And so you never really got to that funding level. Now, this year, you're up to 19, which is great, but that's been, what, 6 years?
So for instance, this year then, if we were at 19, the wise thing would be to leave $1 million in there, not to spend the entire 19, right? If the original fund, we wanted to allocate 18, this year we have a good year, we're gonna get 19, shouldn't we leave that $1 million in there for when we're gonna hit a bad year?
Well, actually, if you look at it, you'll see that the police department's allocation on the half cent went up by that additional money. So I mean, you could take it out of the police, but then you're going against what you're trying to do here today, is to give them more money for officers.
But the additional $1 million that you're gonna get over the estimated this year
Right.
from Prop S
Right.
isn't gonna go towards new officers.
It's going to the police department, which allows them to maintain a certain personnel level.
But not not a personnel level at the 1,400.
You will not be at 14 with the existing sources. And I can tell you another thing, and this is another aside, is that pension costs for the police department have gone up $20 million since the original.
that's the real problem, yeah.
That's another problem. I mean, so you have to be able to say, okay, if the costs are going up so much, how do you maintain that same level of staffing with this fixed level of revenue?
Yeah, well, the pension is really the big problem.
It is a big problem.
Mental
It's a
health.
big problem. Okay, so going back to the bill in front of us,
It's important to me, yeah.
how much is needed to pay for 160 additional officers? And then how much is this supposed to generate, this proposal?
My recollection is that 160 would be around 9 million. And this was generating 8. I think you took out one source. Well,
Yes, we did.
8.
So where's the other $1 million coming from?
Well, it wouldn't, the amount of sources you have wouldn't provide for 160.
So this would not generate enough revenue, even on its best day, to
Not
pay
for
for
160,
160 new officers?
No.
So where are we getting this 160 from?
That was the goal, I apologize, that was the goal of the chief. And of course, like everyone, we'd all like as much as we can, but right now, this is what we have. I know that there might be some other ways beyond us going to the voters to increase fees, but right now, this is what we have.
So what will 8 million pay for? How many officers will 8 million pay for?
I wanted to say, in my earlier presentation, I had something on that. Let me look at it.
Okay.
7.5 was 130. It was about 140.
About 140.
The chief wants to
Yeah, the chief wanted to answer
chief
that
wants
question
to
as well.
come
jump in
forward.
for a second, too. The projections for year one, 160 officers all in, are 8.7 million. We're not going to be able to hire all 160 officers in the first year, so there is a little bit of ramp-up time into that. The cost projected out for the next 3 years, just to give you an example, and this is just salary and benefits, you know, pension, health care, dental, all of the stuff that all the city employees. Year one, 8.7, year two, 9.0, year three, 9.3. But again, it will take between 18 and 24 months to get all these officers hired, ramped up. So to your point, and I agree with you on this, and Paul will, to Paul's disagreement, if there are excess funds left in it, it should remain in the fund to make up for those years. The way that it was described is, although the money from that 11, what account was that? 1123 was spent in the police department. In essence, it's a plan. It's something that could have come from the general fund. So I agree with you in that conversation.
Okay.
So 160 officers, year one, if we could hire them on, you know, July 1, year one, 8.7, it'll take us 18 to 24 months to get all 160. So there is a little bit of ramp-up time. Does that help?
Okay, so Paul, if I can make a information request here, what I like to see is a chart or spreadsheet over a 10-year period showing how much this thing will generate, estimated per year, how many additional officers will be brought online each year. And I guess you can work with the chief on that one.
Okay, yeah, I can do on the revenue side, absolutely. In terms of, the chief knows more about the academy structure and how they generate. And when they
In year one, I mean, do you expect this thing to start generating about 8 million in year one?
No, that would be the annualized cost. So depending on which one you're talking about, let's say the parking, the vehicle license fee, that's paid with the property tax each year. So that's usually a one-time deal. And so if you did that, that would be, you'd receive that entire amount. The increase in the parking revenue, that should probably be prorated based on the number of months in which it's in effect for a fiscal year. So yeah, I mean, you'd have to look at it from that standpoint. So the first year, you probably wouldn't get the full amount. But yeah, it's important that you don't budget some level of officers that the underlying revenue that we're talking about can't support. I mean, that's obviously important.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you can do that, that will give us a better idea of how much we're generating and how much we're spending each year, realizing that, Chief, how many do you think will be brought online in year one?
160, I would take probably 2 full years to get it up and running to that.
1.6, so maybe 80 in the first year?
Aggressively, yeah.
Okay. And so showing that. And then in your calculations of how many officers this would pay for, you're making some assumptions about pension increases?
Yeah, and this was a little bit of a, when I originally presented this back in December, I had to talk with the pension actuary and say, what's the cost of the new officers? Right now, as we mentioned, pension costs are high on the police side, and it's like 40-some-odd%. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that's not the incremental cost of a new officer is 45, because that's an unfunded liability that's already been accrued, a lot of that is. So what's the new cost? And it was something between 13 to 15%. So that's what that assumes. Now, again, if pensions don't meet their assumptions, you start accruing unfunded liabilities. Now, hopefully that's not the case, but it's possible. And again, I think pensions is an ongoing theme here that obviously needs to be addressed. But that's what the assumption is in this. It's basically about a 15% or so of pay, which would be the incremental cost of each new officer.
Okay. I had a question for the sponsor and then for the chief. So would you be open to the idea of streamlining this as much as possible and making it as, I would say, as honest as possible, a representation to the voters? So I would think that in light of what we've heard especially, that we should, if it's going to be for officers, if it's going to be for new officers, we should make it just for new officers. I think when we add in all that other stuff, it leaves it very open for, either this board or the ENA or chiefs in the future to start tapping this fund for other things, which may put us in a difficult position in the future of being able to maintain the promised number of officers. Because that's what I think we need to avoid. We made a specific promise to the voters before about a certain level, very specific, and we didn't meet that. And now we find ourselves having to come back again. And this still won't even get us close to 1,400. This will get us at what? What are we at now, 12?
1250. So it would put us right at 14.
So maybe around a little less than 14. Okay. Would you be open to that?
Amending Board Bill 54 to be just under,
I'm not proposing an amendment now. I'm just asking if you'd be open to just making a specific, if we're going to be about new officers.
for
make it
salaries
specific.
and training only.
Um,
Would that be something we're discussing? As in, is that something, am I,
Salaries and benefits.
Yeah, I mean, the costs associated just with the new officers.
so that'd
So
be
it's not-
salaries, training?
The number that I gave you, the $8.7 million for year one, salary, benefits, pension, and it includes about $4,000 for firearms, shirts, pants, the equipment that they get. That's a one-year expense. After that, I think I allocated $100 per officer for uniforms and things like that. So year one, as long as we included to outfit them, to get them equipped to go on the street, yes, after that. So salary, benefits, and first-year equipment.
I mean, the point is, I just want to make sure that if we're telling voters that we're going to get 100 and whatever the number is, 120, 140, 160, that we actually do get that.
Okay. So, yes, we would be open to amending the Board Bill 54 so that when we talk about what crime reduction professional policing fund would fund, it would be salaries, benefits, and first-year equipment. Correct?
Yeah, that's,
And this would no way go towards pay increases, would it, for existing officers?
directly, no. The only thing that I would offer is if there are raises along the way, this fund would have to contribute towards those. So let's say in 2 years or 3 years, there's a pay raise that the city gets a 1%, 2%. Obviously, those officers' salaries were
But
going
that
up.
would be in the cost associated with new officers, not go towards previous officers.
My goal is to have 160, 130, whatever number we agree on, new officers on the street. So yeah, as long as we agree that if the whole city gets a raise, the whole department gets a raise, the proportion goes towards paying those salaries.
Okay. All right, that's all I have right now.
Okay. Alderman Vaccaro?
I actually have comments and questions, and I have questions for Paul and the chief too, but Chief, right now, we're still down, what, 50-something officers? It was 80-something, just to get us what we're already paying for it, which would get us to the 1,250.
Just over 1,250 officers. We have 51, 54 short right now. I have 24 in the academy. So when that graduates, it'll cut that. The idea is to try and match attrition. My goal is to have another academy class ready to go at the end of July, beginning of August. And so that will keep us close to current. But yes.
And then my next would be for Paul. And Paul, since I've been here, that I can remember, we've never given $1 million for any public, and maybe you can enlighten me, but it's generally been about half that, or, you know, and I guess my other follow-up to it is, when this passed, that next year, then we should have had close to 1,400 officers because the funding should have been, have we ever hit 1,400 since this?
I don't believe, but as I mentioned, the very first year, it didn't, the sales tax
So the
declined.
second- the
So you
second
didn't even
year-
meet the original $18 million. Right.
I wasn't down here at the time, but I remember the big selling point was $1 million to public safety programs and 1,400 police on the force. And I don't know that since 2008 we've ever seen that.
In FY09, I believe we had $1 million budgeted.
It might have been budgeted, but never got there.
Well, in FY10, I think, and I think you're right, because in FY10, we budgeted $2 million because the first year's revenue hadn't been spent. FY11, we had $1.3 million. I think, again, that's the new, that I think what we're doing there in those years is budgeting the new million plus whatever was unspent from the previous year, and that's why you had $1.3 million. FY12, we did see $800,000 for professional services and $200,000. I think at that point, we were still addressing the budget.
Professional services being?
But that's where those items are budgeted. They're allocated to the Department of Public Safety, and then it's awarded through this committee to the various groups. That's where professional services is. It was in FY13 where you saw $600,000, and it's been $635, $635, and $628 since then.
Right,
With the $300,000 in addition to that going to the drug court. So, I mean, it's always been $1 million, but it's just the question of where is it allocated. The big difference being between the $1 million and the 600 something is the drug court has an allocation of that
So
portion.
we gave 300 and something each. I wouldn't mind seeing the accounting on that, because I've always been of the opinion that we've never given that $1 million.
Yeah, I can give you this sheet right here. I've just queried our database upstairs. In terms of the detail of the groups that receive the money.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to see.
That's more, public safety would have that. I don't have that.
I'd like to see that. And I guess my other question has just to the sponsor, it's just real quick. If the plan is to get, how long have you been working on this? Just curious.
I apologize, and the reason I do is because it was before we went on break.
So, and then we got these, what? When did we actually get these? A couple days ago?
The actual, yeah, correct.
Right, so, and I know your intentions want to pass these out today. my intention is to make the best decision for the taxpayers I could possibly make. I don't see why or how we could pass this out today, and just my opinion, I can't vote for it until I know, until there's absolute assurances where this is going to go, absolute assurances to numbers. I think when you start talking about the 10% to the parking, I mean, stuff that's going to come up, that the city parking lots don't have to pay that, so it puts parking lots, you know, at an unfair disadvantage. Tying stuff to red light camera tickets, we're not even sure we're going to make it through the court system yet. I mean, I just think there's, I would like to take more time to really think about it. I'm far more police, but I also know that if we do this wrong, and we had the property tax increase last week, which in my neighborhood went about $300 a house. We're going to put the general obligation bond, which is going to be tied to property tax and personal property tax. We're going to put this one on a ballot. I think it's a recipe for defeating everything. And I think if we, I don't think there's anybody out there that doesn't want to see more police, but I do think that we, given our past history, that we really need to be a little bit more solid in what we're doing.
Yeah, if we had not been on break, as long as we had been on break, then we would have had more time. Under the assumption, which is I want you all to know, this would need to pass by May 26th to put it on the ballot in August for the voters to decide, not you and I, but for the voters to decide. And then we would, once it's passed, like we talked about, the increase in the driver's license that comes, is it the beginning of the year, Paul? So if we don't get this on the ballot, that means we go further down the road with less police officers. And just so I can be clear, is that in my ward, and I will not speak for anyone else's ward, their number one priority is more police. And the reason they want more police is because it's not going to matter what any of us think. If crime continues to go at the rate it is, at the violence it is, the people in my ward will move out. So you're not going to get any property taxes, you're not going to get any real estate taxes, because they're going to start selling their homes. And that's what I don't want. And so that's the only reason I see it as a priority, is because having the actual police officers out there does make a difference.
But we heard from Paul that it's not even a guarantee on the number of police. We're being told it was 160, well, it could be 130, could be less, depending on whatever in the next year or two. I'd rather, again, and we've been back for a while. I mean, these certainly could have been a few weeks ago brought to us. I don't like the fact that something's being put in front of us 2 days, make a decision real quick, and there's stuff in there that I can't support. And you know, I still think I need the time to actually digest this, talk to some of the other members, including you, talk to the chief, talk to Paul, and come up with what I would feel comfortable in supporting.
Well, I will say it was put on the agenda last week, and then it was first read on Friday. Now, what I do want to say is, I don't just take legislation that people hand me and introduce it. I read it, I go through it, I think just like all of you.
So,
how does it impact our general revenue? How does it impact our residents? And I don't just think about how does it just impact the 16th Ward, I look at how it impacts the entire city, because I want to look at the scope of the city. And so I did not like some of the things that were in the legislation. So there were many meetings. I scratched out many things. I thought things that we don't need to increase because it wouldn't make sense, or it wouldn't even pass out of committee, much less pass the voters. So I try as best I can to filter all the legislation prior to introducing it. So I just want to let you know I can put that on me, as in I don't just introduce it because somebody hands it to me and says, hey, this is a great idea. I say, wait a minute, as an elected official, as a resident, as a taxpayer, here are my concerns. And that is exactly what I do. So then they scratch their heads and like, she doesn't like this.
Well, but any piece of legislation, for the most part, that I've ever done, I send out a letter long before. I ask people if you got any thoughts or any changes, please make them. And you know that. And sometimes it takes forever for me to get something put together, but long before I have ever introduced something, I've sent out letters to everybody, I've gotten opinions from everybody, so that when I actually introduce it, I'm not putting everybody under a time clock saying, well, I looked at it and I'm so intelligent that I can deal with everything by myself. I'm going to put this in front of you, and you got 2 days, it was first read Friday, this is Wednesday. Even though I read them, that's what made me pull out Prop S. I pulled Prop S out, and the promises that were made.
And I did. I talked to other legislators, elected officials. I started discussing, different ideas. And there were just some things that.
And nobody, I'm on the Public Safety Committee. I didn't count then?
No, not the, no, that's
I'm
why
just
we're
curious. You said
here.
you talked to other ones.
No,
Jack,
that's why
or
we're here,
anybody else?
Joe.
Maybe she talked to anybody else?
No, I was asking personal opinions. That's all.
Well, I'm just
personal
saying
opinions.
that I don't remember being asked. I did call the chief, and, I agree with the chief. We talked yesterday about this. We need the more police. I just don't think, I think putting this on the ballot, given our past history with Prop S, throwing in the general obligation bond, throwing in the fact that property tax blanketly went up across the city, people are going to be like, and again, I just think and again, like I said, one of the sources is the red light tickets, which stands a very good chance of being thrown out, and they're talking about putting that on a ballot. So we're gonna, we might, as a funding source, if we're gonna gamble on the red light tickets, maybe we can go down and take a few $1 million, put it on black or red on the roulette wheel, and if we're gonna gamble on a source that we're not even sure is gonna be there. And I know I'm being silly, but I'm just saying that
we haven't gotten to that bill, but I was going to discuss that bill when we got to that specific bill. First, I wanted to make sure that we were all in agreement of setting up this particular fund, Board Bill 54, and Alderman French had talked about possibly a committee substitute, which I am open to, so that we designate it and we clearly define for the voters, because that, in the end, that's who'll make this decision, are the voters, of where the money will be, how it will be collected, and where it will be spent, period. And that's the goal.
And they made that decision on Prop S, but we didn't do it. We put it to the voters. They made a decision. We said, we're going to give you 1,400 police and $1 million. And we didn't do it. Mm-hmm. And we're going to tell them, yeah, but that was then, this is now, and this time we really, really mean it. It was back
No, it's
then.
the opposite. That's why I made sure that we had a special fund that was set up that we can track.
Well, I think it was a
this
special
funding.
fund before. Am I right, Paul? Yes. So it was a special fund before, maybe just not as special as this fund's going to be. This might be an extra, should put extra special fund.
Right,
Because the special fund didn't work, but maybe we could do an extra special fund.
right.
I got issues on multiple levels. If you go to a ball game, you're going to pay more to park. When you go to get your driver's license, you're going to pay more. We're going to gamble on red light tickets. The city parking lots don't pay it, so we're starting to put now businesses that are trying to do business in the city at an unfair disadvantage. I know that we've asked the parking people to absorb putting security on their lots. In fact, we actually, I think it's a mayor's order, that they, in order to protect the cars downtown, which I agree with, that they need to have more security on their lots. And I believe it was from 4 hours, it went to 8 hours, but I could be wrong. But at least I feel a little more comfortable that when I'm at the ball game, that my car, somebody's watching it. But we keep putting stuff on people. I would ask that you don't pass it out today, that the chairman would hold another meeting. I don't care if it's in 1 day or 2 days. I'd really like time to sit down and talk to some of my colleagues to come up with what I think might be something that I could support, that the people of the 23rd Ward can support. I know I've received numerous phone calls about this. I get a lot of calls about the crime too, but I've received a lot of phone calls about this. You know, you were at the public meeting, the chief walked in, and there was, what, maybe 150 people there at that meeting, and when you brought that up and said, we need more police, but in order to do that, we're going to have to raise these kind of fees, and you saw them blow up. I mean, it got out of control for a short bit when the one guy's, what happened to the money that you promised us before? And them are the phone calls that I'm getting.
Right, and I wish we would have had Paul Payne at that meeting. I really do, because it was the one gentleman that did stand up and say that we actually, as aldermen, be very clear, they blame us, that we took that funding and took it to different places and not to the police. Had Paul Payne been there, then he could have explained specifically where every dime has gone. So that's what I would have liked. So I would be more than happy to have a second meeting. Well, we didn't put the meeting together, but it was for second district to explain to people about where that money has gone.
Well, I would like another day or two to talk to some of my colleagues, and it's up to you if you want to, but to try to pass this out as it is, I can't support it. I do support more police. I can't support this. I could support something. I just would like to take the time to talk to the chief, to Paul, and some of my colleagues, so that whatever I come up with, or whatever we come up with as a group, is something that we can go out to the public. I mean, if you look at that general obligation bond, which is going to go out to the public, it's been a year in the making. It's been changed. It's been 200,000. It's been down to 160. The way it's been done is back and forth. It keeps getting changed because we're trying to come up with something that's palatable, something that when we put it out there won't fail. And I think throwing stuff out without a lot of discussion, it gets to be anyway, I don't want to babble on, and I am. As it stands, I would have to see changes, and I can't support it as is. I certainly would ask that we have another meeting.
Okay. All right, we're going to go back to Alderman Bosley. You had a question.
Yeah. How much money is expected annually? And then I got another question. Are these new funds?
Yes, it was 8.1 million.
Where are we getting it from?
Well, that would be the other bills we were going to cover, which was red light camera fees, increasing the tax on your license, and the public garages, an increase on the fee on the public garages.
Okay, well, who will have control over this new money?
The Director of Public Safety.
Will it have to come through E&A, or can they spend it
Yeah.
without it coming to E&A?
Yes.
And then ultimately to
It
the
has
Board
to go
of
through
Aldermen?
E&A.
And then it would end up at the board, where we have an opportunity to look at it?
I didn't think it came to the Board of Alderman, but Paul? It goes,
If it's going to be appropriated, it has to go through the normal appropriation process, just like any other budget item.
Before the fact?
Before it becomes appropriated, you would have to have a recommendation by the Board of E&A, as well as in the form of a appropriation ordinance, and then that would also go, I assume, through Ways and Means, just through the normal
Okay. Now,
budgetary
will this
process.
be done annually or as they occur?
I would expect that given that you're talking about a proposal that would happen during the next fiscal year, let's say you do, and some of these items pass, then you would have to do, in order to use those funds, you would need a supplemental appropriation. And that would be the normal process where the Board of E&A would make a recommendation, and then it would be submitted to the Board of Aldermen. The Board of Ways and Means typically would have a hearing on the appropriation, and then it would be approved by the full board. Once it's established annually, then it would be incorporated into your annual budget each year.
Okay.
Okay. Alderman Cone?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the sponsor for introducing these bills. I know it's not an easy task when you're talking about raising, taxes and fees, but I think it does open up the door to a lot of really good discussion, specifically as it pertains to policing and public safety in our city. Having listened to some of the questions from my colleagues, I share a lot of their sentiments and thoughts. I do, as it pertains to this specific board bill 54, as we've discussed, I think, my understanding is that, our goal here is to provide an additional level of service through hiring additional officers. And so, I would recommend, and I know that we're, probably not going to pass these out at this particular committee hearing, so, whether this is an amendment that's offered at our next hearing or whatnot, is up to, well, I could do it myself, or, we could talk later about it with the sponsor of the bill. But just adding in, in section 2, where it says crime reduction and professional policing funds shall be used to pay for the costs related to hiring more and retaining said police officers, and then eliminating investing in programs to prevent and reduce crime, and then continuing on and training said officers. And so it specifically relates to the hiring and, retention and training of new officers. And then, the investing in programs to prevent and reduce crime. Obviously, we have, the Prop S funds that are available already that, work to that extent. So I think that simple change would really address pretty much the concerns of, the folks on the committee that I've heard at this point so far. I do have, and, I know that we'll probably listen to the rest of the board bills one-on-one, but I don't know if this is a question necessarily for the sponsor of the bill or, possibly the chief or Paul Payne, the budget director. I have some concerns as it relates to the generation of funds that we have already that are underneath the discretion of the city. I know that regionally we've come under national scrutiny as a region for how police tactics, strategies, et cetera, help support municipal, governments across our region. There was recently an op-ed that was published in, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that said that the city of St. Louis is more fair, equitable, and just basically because we have 2.3% of our revenue coming in from traffic violations. And while that's an admirable thing, I actually have quite a few of my constituents that are very upset about that. We have a lot of issues on our streets as it pertains to quality of life issues. Speeding being one of them. Residential streets in particular, there's cars that are flying up and down them all the time. School buses, people driving regular vehicles, et cetera. And it's actually disheartening to me to see that we're looking at decreasing the amount of revenue that's coming in through our municipal fines. If we're at 2.3% right now, that to me represents, a disservice to the constituency of the city because we are not actually addressing, some of those basic quality of life concerns that impact people on a very daily and regular basis. And then, looking at the budget that we had, dropped on our desk, earlier this month or late last month, if I'm looking at page 10 underneath the city courts, we're looking at roughly a 60% decrease in the revenue for FY16. That line, traffic violations, currently sits at 6.6 million, which represents that 2.3%, and then it's dropping down to $2.1 million. So that, in my estimation, is actually probably a better strategy than introducing additional fees and taxes on the citizens of this city, the taxpayers of this city. If we were to simply have our officers, doing what they do best and, policing the city and possibly even, when you do a traffic violation, you're also finding things like weapons that are illegal, folks that have warrants out. I know our municipal courts are doing what they can right now to administer fees fairly and appropriately for people based off of their income and financial situation. So I think the burden right now isn't necessarily on the police to do their job. Right now it's on the courts. And so, our courts are now, acting very much in an equitable and fair manner, which I applaud and think is a wonderful idea. But now the focus should be on, actually addressing some of those quality of life concerns, which, frankly could address some of the shortfall that we're seeing in the police department and the budget there. So I don't know who would be the most appropriate person to answer that question, why we're not doing that. But, it seems like it's not a catch-22 situation here. If we're doing our jobs and policing our streets and, collecting the revenue from them, the police, could essentially make up for the shortfall that we're seeing right now.
Okay, so you're wanting to know, could we increase the amount of tickets we issue in the city?
Now, my understanding is that the state just passed a law that, basically the Mills Creek law or Mill Creek Valley law, whatever, Mack Creek Valley law, decreased it from 30% to 20% across the state and then to 12.5% in St. Louis County. We are obviously not part of St. Louis County right now, so I don't believe that 12.5%, applies to the city of St. Louis. I'm not even recommending that we get to 12.5%, but at the end of the day, and I've talked with a number of my colleagues, we all get these complaints on a very regular basis, if not weekly or daily, then every month as we go to different neighborhood association meetings across the city. Speeding is a huge issue. And then on top of it, I continually hear about, crimes with guns and all that kind of stuff. These criminals aren't just, walking the streets. They're driving vehicles and they're doing drug deals and they're running up and down our highways at all ungodly speeds. We've seen a number of major collisions in the last, month and a half alone, and shootings and whatnot. If traffic enforcement was a little bit more of a priority, I'm not saying that it has to be the priority, but if it was at least a little bit more of one, I think that we would see a reduction in crime, but also, addressing some of the concerns that we have right now as it pertains to budgeting
All
as
right.
well.
I would like to have a response from the chief.
So I always get, conversations about revenue generated from tickets are always challenging. We don't have quotas in the city of St. Louis, nor do I think we should have
I'm not
quotas.
suggesting that we do.
Well, but to an extent that you are saying we should push up revenues, and so how do we do that? I have to sell the officers to go out and write more tickets.
Yeah.
The trend around law enforcement now is actually even moving away from ticketing into positive ticketing, to give you a notice that you were speeding or to give you a notice you ran the stop sign and to try and change the behavior, because ultimately that's what traffic enforcement is about changing the behavior. So without putting in quotas, without setting up a revenue stream that is going to be unpredictable at best, because obviously you don't know how many tickets are going to write, and the national trend is moving away from that. To your point about enforcement in the neighborhoods, though, one of the things that I've done is moved our priorities off of the interstates and into the neighborhoods. And so you should see in Dutchtown and in Walnut Park and in Penrose and Bevo and all of the neighborhoods an increase in officers on the city streets writing tickets. But you couple that with the population that we serve, it's a tax perhaps, and it's been called that in some of the municipalities, that has a disproportionate impact on some. And so I worry about that. So unpredictable, cities are moving away from it into positive ticketing. It's done for change of behavior, and I don't want a quota system. So there's a lot of things that step up against that.
And I think what a lot of my residents are looking for is that change in behavior.
Mm-hmm.
We have a serious problem with speeding in this city. And I mean, I personally haven't witnessed an officer writing tickets in my ward, in a very long time, probably 2 or 3 years at best. I know that it does happen. I'm sure it does. But, Virginia, Grand, Merrimack, Gustine, all get treated like they're a superhighway. I mean, the speed limits right around there are probably 35 miles an hour, and people are driving up and down them 50 to 60 miles an hour. That is not a quota. That is a public safety issue. That is a quality of life concern. I have about 30% of the population in my ward is underneath the age of 18. They're kids. They're playing in the streets. They're playing in the alleyways. Cars flying up and down these residential streets is not acceptable, and the behavior isn't changing. Honestly, it's not. So when we're talking about, behavioral changes, it's not happening. And what continually gets brought to my attention by my neighbors, by my constituents, is the concern around and lack of enforcement around speeding. And so, I understand that we want to appear as, we're not establishing quotas. I'm not saying that we establish quotas. I'm not saying that every single police officer out there has to write 30 tickets a day. I'm not, the mayor of Ladue saying something like that to a police chief. I'm not telling you that at all. What I'm saying is that there is a general concern about the health and well-being of people who are walking across streets who have for a long time been dealing with this issue. And, if I would be interested to actually see how many rank-and-file officers are writing tickets for speeding.
Well, and-
You know, I know that we actually have a traffic division that specifically goes out and writes tickets, but rank-and-file officers, my understanding is that actually in the first district, there's only one speedometer that, you know, gauges, you know, speeding. So it can't be every single officer like in Creve Coeur or Ladue or Olivet that's sitting on the shoulder of the highway, or their vehicles are equipped with these, you know, mechanics already. In the city, you know, most of the police vehicles, to my understanding, don't have license plate scanners or things of that nature, you know, and we have one speedometer per district. You know, so in my mind, that is not setting quotas. You know, that is, you know, we are trying to equip officers to do their jobs and address these quality of life concerns in the neighborhoods. And what I continually hear is that that's still a concern. And so, you know, no one, I don't think anyone at this table, any one of my colleagues would ever suggest that we go over to any type of a quota system. I think that that's deplorable. You know, I've had family members and friends that have been menaced by that out in the county. I'm one of the biggest advocates for reform in our, you know, justice system in the region. You know, but I think that we have basic, essential quality of life concerns that need to be addressed in our neighborhoods. And there's a lot of people who feel like that's not happening right now.
And so there are multiple devices that officers can check out. The traffic safety cars are programmed with radar systems that will track people's speed, but there are multiple portable ones that officers can
How
check
many
out.
traffic safety cars do we have?
There are about 22 maybe.
Across the whole city?
Across the whole entire city.
Those are in the traffic division, or those are in the districts themselves?
The traffic safety division. Traffic safety division. When we talk about, and I hear you about quotas, but now what you're offering is that 3% of the revenue for the city comes, or the police department comes from tickets, or 4%. And so what happens in years where we don't miss that? Like, I'll give you an example. We were here last week and we talked about an 11% increase in calls for service, a 7% increase in arrests that the officers are doing. So now, when we don't make those quotas, what happens? And I use the word quota loosely in that. When the budget has an expectation that 4% of the revenue comes from tickets, but we're out reducing crime. So I understand it. There's a balance that
Budget
happens.
has an expectation that we're reducing it by 60%. So, which part of that, my understanding, discussing it with Paul Payne, might be the red light camera tickets going into the escrow account. But right now, red light camera tickets are not a
big
reliable
question.
source, and we're
Absolutely.
discussing that right now. You know, red light camera tickets are one of the, you know, ways that we're going to raise this $8 million to fund 120 positions in the police department. We aren't collecting that money right now. It's going into an escrow fund. So for us to even pass a board bill right now that says that we're going to use that money for additional police officers is a farce, in my opinion, just because we don't know which way that court is going to rule at this point. And it's sitting there, you know, not being used. And so it's putting on this, you know, perception or guise to our constituency saying we're passing this bill, we're going to have the revenue go to additional police, but the police aren't going to be able to use the money because it's sitting in an escrow account somewhere. So while we're in the, you know, business of talking about things that aren't going to happen right now and unreliable sources of revenue, you know, I think that, you know, dealing with the quality of life concerns in our neighborhood is a really big issue.
And we agree on that. And that's why we've talked about the 160 new officers. And so the question is, how do we get there? If we want increased traffic enforcement, if we want increased presence in the parks, if we want increased presence on major thoroughfares, we have to increase the size of the police department. So I hear you about that, and that's a byproduct that can come. 160 new officers is 8.5 officers per shift per district.
And
so that's how it balances
even
out.
unrelated to a traffic violation, how many tickets get written in the city for littering?
And I don't know. I just have to look. I don't know how many tickets are written for littering off the top.
More than 100?
I don't know. So I don't want to tell you.
That's a basic quality of life issue that I am sure every single alderman at this table gets a phone call at least weekly about trash. And I have yet to see a police officer write a ticket for littering. So not a traffic violation, not a quota, you know, it's a basic quality of life concern that's, you know, a serious concern for a lot of people. I get tired of picking up trash every time I walk out front of my house.
And just to give you an example,
know.
and I think everybody likes the problem properties police officers that we have. So we've dedicated police officers to dealing with those quality of life issues, for littering, for trash in alleys, boarded up buildings, a variety of things. So that is a priority to us. we can continue to go back and forth. I think we both agree we need more officers. The question is, where's the funding stream?
Well-
I do not like the idea of depending on the police department to write tickets to fund itself. So
I don't like the idea of the building division, writing building violations to sustain itself either. However, there are concerns with buildings and the quality of them in the city, and we have building inspectors that we hire to do their job to make sure that people are living in quality housing and that they're, basically maintaining the building and maintaining property values in this city. That's their job. They do it. Do I like the notion of, telling building inspectors, hey, there's buildings here that need to have violations written against them? No. But the fact of the matter is that they're, contributing to a blight in the city, and they have a job that needs to be done. I don't think building inspectors, I don't think police officers enjoy writing tickets, but at the end of the day, we have a basic
And we agree.
life that needs
We
to be
agree on that, and
addressed.
there are police officers, the problem property, the traffic safety division that go out and do that. The building inspector is a little bit different. Their primary function is to inspect new construction or to go out and address code violations. Police officers answer the call when you call 911 for a disturbance, answer the call when you call 911 because your car is broken into, call 911 because there are suspicious people in your neighborhood. So the scope of the job is much different, so it's not a true comparison. And it all comes back to addressing.
Generating revenue for city departments. There are functions that each one of them do that provide a quality of life issue for the residents of the city.
And
I'm not saying that police officers and building inspectors are the same in terms of their job, but they do both, have particular issues within or roles within their job that do generate revenue for the city. And it's not because they're doing it unfairly, it's because they're addressing, either legal concerns or, blight in the city. And so
let me ask you a question then. I was considering following the lead of New York or Philadelphia with positive ticketing, which means that if we stop somebody, to give them a ticket that doesn't have a fine associated with it to try and change the behavior. Certainly from my perspective, from a community outreach perspective, a relationship with the community, that has significant value. It kind of goes the opposite direction of this writing tickets for that. So how do we balance that? So if I came up with a community strategy that says, hey, I'm going to not ticket, I'm going to change the behavior, so I'm going to stop more people and give them a ticket, a positive ticket that says, hey, we stopped you, this is a warning, please be careful, there are kids on the street, all of the things, the revenue drops with that, I change the behavior, and I have better relations. So that's something.
changing the behavior, though.
The interaction, and here's, in the law enforcement.
I understand how it can change the interaction with the police department and build goodwill with the police department, and I applaud that, but is that actually changing the behavior of the person who's speeding?
The enforcement strategy is that the person that was stopped has an immediate consequence. They are stopped. They have the interaction with law enforcement. And then the 10, 12, 30 cars that see that interaction realize that there are police here enforcing that, and that has a residual effect as
But if
well.
those people know that they're not going to get an actual ticket when they get pulled over, how is that changing the behavior?
But still, it's the immediate impact to that individual. But if it makes the community feel better about the police department, I think that's all something that we're interested in too. So I hear you about that. 2.5%, 2.1%, 3%, whatever the number was, I believe is a good number. I think if we push that up, we get into areas that I don't think any of us want to have that conversation around, especially when the national conversation is a little bit different right now.
What is
red light cameras?
What's the national average in terms of traffic revenue and by percent of general revenue?
For a big city like ours, we're probably pretty close to that. But when you look at there are 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the country. The vast majority of them are in the Ferguson, Florissant, Ladue, Clayton size,
Yeah,
not in our size. So it's going to be hard. I can look at the mid-size like
on
us.
Interstate 70, west of Columbia before I even hit Kansas City, and I'm getting a $170 ticket for a city that, has 500 people in it. I understand where that money's going, okay? I understand, the issues that we have as a region, but my concern is, cities of similar size, whether it's, Nashville,
I'll look and I'll get a
Louisville,
number.
Indianapolis, Kansas City, where are they? And I am not suggesting, I will be perfectly clear about this again, I am not suggesting quotas. What I am suggesting is that we address the strategy that we're using in terms of how, and I'm not saying that it's a reliable source, but a lot of these aren't reliable sources. The red light camera tickets is a perfect example of something that's not a reliable source of income right now. We don't even know where it's going to be in the next year. So, if we're talking about reliable sources of income, we shouldn't even be here right now today. So,
And I hear you that quotas aren't the answer. I don't want to get into a position where the police department's budget or the city's budget depends on revenue generated by the police department. Because when you're gone, I'm gone, somebody's gone, that system becomes
I'm not
the
looking
vulnerable
at
to
the police
co-option.
department supporting the city's revenue.
But more than 2 or 3 or 4%. I hear you. The other issue is, and I've said it publicly, red light cameras, I'm a huge supporter of them. Change the behavior, give you your revenue stream, and it keeps police officers focused on other activities. So I'm a huge supporter of red light cameras. I know it's completely out of our control, but again, that does everything that you and I just had a conversation about without a filter, blindly. So we agree, we're just saying it in slightly different ways.
Well, I look forward to the discussion on the other board bills, but that's really all the questions that I have on Board Bill 54 right now. Thank you.
Alderman Carter.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Well, I basically agree with everything that Alderman French and Alderman Cone were saying. I just think that this is a broad realm that we're trying to cover and that we need to narrow it down. So are you looking into amending this now to take it down strictly to salaries and what else was it saying? Salaries and
benefits, and training.
And training. Okay. Alderwoman Green is shaking her head. No, so I guess that's not it. Okay. So and in terms of training, is there another way that we can fund training? Because I believe that asset forfeiture fund, the fund that I love so much.
Again, inconsistent. Really, and to narrow the scope down, because I think this is this important. I'm trying to help a little bit here. Salaries, benefits, first-year equipment. That's really what I'm looking for. The training does get into an ambiguous area. Hey, I believe that in the police department we can absorb the training cost for 160 new people outside of the initial academy, which is built into that first-year money. So to train them to be police officers. So even if we work on narrowing it down further, salary, benefits, first-year equipment. And even I'll go so far, just to give you an example, a Kevlar vest that an officer wears has a 5-year life expectancy. The warranty expires at 5 years, and I'm not going to put an officer in a vest. So every 5 years I have to invest in new vests for officers, about $500 in a person. Those are things that we can absorb. If this money is officers, training, first-year equipment, I think we're pretty good.
Okay, and is there any way that we can specifically put in detail how these officers will be dispersed? Like, can we put something specifically in there that says that these officers will be dispersed into high crime areas with, high crime areas?
The plan is to put them in the vast majority, 90+%, in blue shirts, in police cars, riding in our neighborhoods. It's not to build command structure. Actually, command structure, when I took over in January of 13, we had 21 captains and above. On July 1st, we'll have 20 captains and above. So I'm not looking to grow the size of the command structure. I'm looking to do what we all want, to put blue shirts, police officers in cars. But again, I need the ability to do things like hotspot policing. I need the ability to go to where problems are. So I don't want to get that narrow in it, but I do want vast majority into cars in the police department.
Yeah.
And the other limit is let's say that I wanted to beef up a narcotics unit at some point because we had a narcotics problem. I need the flexibility inside the organization to be able to manage, to do things like that. But I'm not looking to grow anything except the rank and file, the blue shirts.
Yeah, good, because that'd be my residents' number one concern is that, right now they already paying tax dollars towards the police department, and they claim that they don't see you guys, and so it's like you paying double.
And
get the same result.
I said this on Thursday when I was here. As crime has gone down, we've gotten comfortable and shrunk the size of the police department for a variety of reasons, whatever the reasons are. Now we're at a level that it's harder to push through to continue those decreases. We need to grow the size of the police department. We as a city need to be flexible and nimble like that to realize good times, hey, everybody, hey, police, maybe one year we're backseat to fire because the fire's got an issue. EMS, parks, whatever it is. But when we're front and center, we need to be able to push up and ramp up. That's what we're asking to do now, to
All
ramp
right,
up.
now, are there any, because if you're going to narrow this down, then we have to look for other ways to pay for some of the other stuff that's in here that are very important, like training, police officer, and community policing, customer service, bias and recognition, mental health, and policing a diverse city.
And so
are there
let's
other
just have a
ways for that?
conversation about that. Mental health issues, just for example. We do crisis intervention team training. We've trained over 700 of our officers in the department so far. That training happens every couple of months to run new officers through it. Continue to do that. We're doing de-escalation training right now. Over 300 plus officers gone through de-escalation training. I've taken the command staff through implicit bias training. I'm going to take the whole department through implicit bias training. We're going to do those things. So they're going to happen because they are important to me. They're important to the community. They're important to you to make sure that we have a department. So those things are going to happen. And that's why when I talked about narrowing it, I'm not throwing them out. I'm just going to I'm going to be a
Find
little
other
more
ways
creative.
to okay.
I'll give you just an example. Emotional survival for police officers. We've done street survival training for them, and our police foundation has paid for it. I think emotional survival for police officers is the next course. I'm going to ask the police foundation to help pay for that. So I'm as creative as I can be, as out of the box as I can be. I'm looking for that. Because we're setting them off out of this doesn't mean we're not going to do them.
Right, okay. Yeah, I think that's mainly it. If you make those minor changes, I may support it, because right now, in the form that it is I just think that we are giving a huge amount of money to public safety to designate to the police department for them to do whatever with under your definition in Section 2 now. And I may want to speak on one more thing, what Shane was saying, what Alderman Cone was saying. I think that he's right. I think that, and I just think that he said it in a different way. But what I see is mainly the lack of respect for St. Louis Police Department. Like I said, I think the last time I referred to my Jennings definition, if you stand on the border of my ward and you watch folks drive in from Jennings, like you don't see certain things happening in Jennings in terms of traffic related things that you do in the city. You can literally watch folks cross the border, they know where it is, and they come in, the windows come down, trash come out, and they literally do like 100 up West Florissant, literally. And I mean, even I know, you don't go to Jennings and speed through. You put your seatbelt on. You can't ride through if your tent is like mine. and so it's just certain things that I think that Shane was trying to say that that didn't get said. So thank you.
Alderman Coder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question is for the bill's sponsor. Alderwoman, you brought this, I guess these were first read and now they've been brought to the committee. Is there a sense of urgency in this? I mean, why today? Public Safety Committee was scheduled to meet tomorrow. The chairman added this meeting. Walk us through the timeline here. Why are we dealing with this today?
Because I had been meeting, looking at the different ways to find funding to increase the amount of police officers. I don't know about you all, but I think I heard this last week. Your constituents are asking for more police because we have an increase in crime in the city of St. Louis. And so when we looked at where can we find funding for police officers, we also have to remember where we've increased. We've already talked about other places we've increased. So we looked at multiple things. This seemed the most logical and made the most sense and spread it out. So let's also look at the fact that we haven't talked about these other bills, but number one, I know people want to know where the money's going, and that's why I'll entertain a committee substitute that clearly defines salaries, benefits, and first-year equipment. Then we need to look at ways to get money to pay for those police officers. The reason May 26th is the deadline to get it put on the August ballot, so that is clearly a deadline. And otherwise, it would have to go to the November ballot. And we need more police officers. If you look at the police officers that are out there on the street now, okay, they are having to do overtime. We have a lot of police officers that are one to a car that are going to calls of violence. Not any violence we've been used to in this city, but clearly some violence is happening. So my constituents and non-constituents, places I go, they're like, you've got to get us more police officers. And that is why I am here asking all of you, the same thing that our constituents are asking us is, how do we get more police officers?
Thank you, Alderman. You touched on the magic date I was looking for, May 26th. So in order to get this, because ultimately what we're going to be voting on for these revenue sources is voting to allow the people to then vote.
Correct.
So by May 26th, we've got to get this wrapped up so we can give the people an opportunity via an election to vote on whether they want more police officers. I believe the people in the 7th Ward, much like the people in the 16th, want additional police officers on the streets as soon as possible. They've made that very clear. I'm happy to hear that the Alderman will be open to a committee substitute changing some of this language to indicate salaries, benefits, and first-year equipment. Now, my next question is for the Chief. A couple minutes ago, Chief, you indicated during a question from Alderman Carter that you were confident that you could absorb the training costs. And I'd like you to just sort of reiterate that and expand on that, because I believe we need more police officers, but they've obviously got to be properly trained, and some of the training that's specifically laid out in Section 2 of Board Bill 54, specifically the bias recognition, the mental health, the diversity training. I mean, these are things that, obviously we've seen in the last year. These are concerns in police departments nationwide, and I want to make sure that if we're going to get more police officers on the streets, that they're properly trained. So could you further address the training? If we were to introduce a committee substitute, removing that language, can you pay for the training?
Certainly. I would never compromise the training for the officers from a safety perspective, from a relationship perspective to the community. It has to be paramount and a priority. 160 incremental officers in an organization that's 1,250, 1,200 now is not that big of an increase. A lot of these things that we will do will be programmed into their initial training, which is covered by the first-year cost in the academy. Our academy is about 6 months long. It far exceeds the minimum requirements from the state, and in that we have ability and flexibility into programming. De-escalation, mental health, implicit bias, all of those things we're doing anyway. So the incremental cost for training 160 new officers is small and it's not inconsequential, but it's not something that I worry about. We're going to do it anyway. And so I want to make sure that should not be the impediment to this. I can deal with that on an operational level, and I should deal with it on an operational level.
Thank you. And I have no further questions as it relates to this bill. I will have further questions relating, obviously, to the funding sources when we get to that point.
Thank you.
Alderman Spencer.
Thank you, Chairman. And again, I'd like to echo the sentiments of a commitment to you for sponsoring this bill. I think we all can agree that we want more police. That was very clear in the last public safety meeting. We're very grateful for the police that we do have, and we do need more. On the surface, this doesn't look like a very complicated issue, but in all honesty, I know this was read last week, but yesterday was the first time that I had heard anything about this. I felt very much in the dark about it, and while I would very much be on board with, the committee substitute, I would like a day or two to think about this and talk about it with my colleagues and with you. And I think this is a huge priority for me, and I think that the rest of the committee would agree this is a big priority for the rest of us, and we can all make this a priority to continue talking about it. But considering yesterday was the first time I had had a discussion with anybody about this, I think passing it today would be a little premature. As we mentioned, there are a lot of revenue streams that you looked at. I'd like a little more information about everything that you and your team looked at to kind of help me feel more comfortable with, the revenue streams here. I'd like to take a look, so we have salaries and benefits. I'd like to, I know this won't be part of the bill, but kind of mention again my feeling that it's very important to take a look at, getting our office, specific type of new officers on foot, officers on bikes. You know, we talked about some serious quality of life issues here. Alderman Cohn mentioned littering. These are things that are very difficult to address from within a vehicle. Just last night at one of my neighborhood association meetings, it was brought up by our community outreach officer that he drove in his personal vehicle to that meeting. In doing so, he noticed a lot more things that he has never noticed before on the streets of my neighborhoods in his patrol car, and that he's recognizing that folks on the street know him, they see officer vehicles coming from a long, way away, and this is a huge issue that we're having. And so I think getting some officers back on our streets, on foot, on bike, and non-traditional transportation methods will really help. One question I do have, to kind of go back, I know we're going to talk about revenue, but going back to this decrease in traffic violation revenue from, it looks like 8.5 million last year to 2 million next year, that's a decrease in 6.5 million, which is very close to the amount of revenue that we're generating with these revenue streams. Have we included that decrease in this analysis? Have we accounted for that very significant decrease in traffic violation revenue?
As Alderman Cohn pointed out, the biggest drop you see in the city court fines and fees is related to the red light camera revenue that was has been deposited into an escrow agreement since the court ruling. Last year when we had this discussion also, there was an issue with, I recall that there was an issue with the lockbox about when deposits were released to general revenue. So there's a little bit of that. It was a one-time, 1 year was inflated, and you'll look at the previous year was low because there were some revenues and I forget which fiscal year it was 13 were actually paid in FY14, so that inflated that number. But the big difference in revenue is about $4 million a year, most of which is about 3.5 was red light camera, which is currently being paid in escrow, so that's why you see the big drop that you got today. But if and only if that revenue is released, would that be available as a source for the new officers?
Okay, but there is a very serious decrease in the traffic violation revenue, am I correct? I mean, is that how does that affect our current ability to fund officers and the police department, et cetera?
Yeah, that estimate that you're referring to for next fiscal year, I'm assuming FY16?
Well, I mean, looking at FY14 at 8.5 million and FY16 at 2 million, that's a huge decrease in revenue.
I don't have my revenue book in front of me, but I think the actual change was somewhere around 4. Once you take into account that sort of overflow, most of which was the red light camera revenue. That number for FY16 has been incorporated in the FY16 budget estimate, and the budget that we presented, that you have before you now as Board Bill 1, reflects all those estimates. So the decline in city court revenue is incorporated in the overall general fund estimate for FY16 already.
Okay. So again, I'd like to commend the chief and the police department for that 2.3% that was mentioned earlier of revenue that's coming from that. I think that shift to positive enforcement is a good one, and I'm very proud to live in a city that follows that and is moving more towards that. But we do have a culture of breaking the laws in our neighborhoods with the speeding, with the littering. I'd like to make sure that that shift is effective. I know we haven't seen a decrease in speeding, and I think when you have folks that are speeding through the neighborhoods and littering all over the place, it does create a culture of just breaking the law, and that leads to a lot more crime issues. Again, I think I'm on board with the salaries and benefits and changing that for this first board bill, and I look forward to talking about the revenue streams.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Green.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions here. A lot of, I'm going to run, I think, contrary to a few of my colleagues here in terms of if we were to take out, well, let me back up for a second. To me, the entire purpose of this is to reduce crime in the city of St. Louis and make us safer. Mm-hmm. And all of our constituencies want to see more policing as a part of that. What would make me uncomfortable is amending it to take out the prevent and reduce crime piece that is in here. I'm confident with what the chief has brought forth in terms of training, that that can be, covered by what's currently done. And it's, it's pretty standard. I was looking it up, between 5 and 10% of budgets being spent on professional development training. And I guess my question for the chief would be, where are we in terms of the percentage that we currently spend on training and development?
The good news for us is we're probably well below that because we run our own academy. Okay. And so I have subject matter experts in a lot of areas. We do some contracting. Like I said, the Police Foundation paid for street survival. Implicit bias is something I'd go outside the agency for, but we'll run well below that because we run our own training academy.
Okay. So I would be okay taking out the training piece if we did an amended committee substitute, but I would like to keep that prevent and reduce crime, and I'm in agreement that we need to differentiate how this money is spent. So, just for an example, say we allocated 75% toward, policing salaries and benefits and needed supplies, and 25% toward crime prevention. And I would also like kind of definitions of what prevent and reduce crime means, so that it doesn't become just a slush fund for whatever we want. In my mind, I would prefer that language to be crime and prevention. How do we prevent and reduce crime through mental health services, substance abuse services, access to early childhood education, and workforce development. There's significant research behind all of those that they actually produce, that they actually reduce crime. And I think that would allow us to take a multifaceted approach of both increasing the presence of police officers in our community while also investing in those programs that we know do help prevent crimes from taking place in the first place. So those are really, my two things. I would say in terms of traffic tickets, I would not be in favor of using that as a vehicle to increase our revenue. I think that we've already, if we're learning anything through our national dialogue at the moment, it's that is not what is seen as being productive. And Alderman Baringer, I'm following your lead in the 15th Ward, and we're doing a traffic study and figuring out, ways that we can change our infrastructure and change our, in order to decrease that speeding rather than focusing on tickets. Because I'll tell you, when hotspot's been done in our ward and people have been issued traffic tickets for going through stop signs, people are livid because they want people to slow down, but they don't want to be the one that's caught in their own neighborhood doing the St. Louis stop. So I think that there's more effective ways we can look at reducing speeding if we are more strategic in the way that we look at what we're doing. Let's see, is that it? I think that is all of my comments.
To your point, I just want to make sure is that you and I both do grant writing. Mm-hmm. We understand grant writing. We work in nonprofit. We work with trying to help the underserved. And when I came down here and we started with the Prop S funds, right. All it was a matter of someone just saying, I want to apply for it. There was actually no grant process. There was no review. There was no deliverables. There was nothing. So we've actually gotten to that point, and this, I think, we've seen in the last year for the first time. And I would ask you, like myself, I want to see the deliverables and the outcomes from the money we're already giving out that's supposed to be doing exactly what we're talking about. And then we look at the After School for All partnership. That's a state program that was completely cut out, that was effective and making a difference in the city of St. Louis. Right. So I would also say that we look at advocacy at the state level to say you cut funding for programs that worked in the city of St. Louis for kids for after school. So, and I know we're both on the same for that. I also agree, this is not going to fix everything, but it's a start. We have to look at all the other things that have increased the crime, that have changed everything. But yeah, we have programs out there. We have the St. Louis Mental Health Board that puts out $6 million a year into programs that make a huge impact and have deliverables in the city of St. Louis. So I agree with you there.
Okay.
But thank you. I appreciate it.
And if, you know, the other, and the other caveat to that is, yes, we do have these other programs out there, but we also know coming from nonprofit that those programs never have the money that they need to meet the demand and meet the capacity. And so I think the more we can do to support those programs that are doing that good work and find money on our end to supplement what they're doing, we're going to produce better outcomes for the city.
I believe that Alderman Vaccaro had
Just a real quick follow-up. I know that the one revenue is the parking revenue, and one of the workers stopped me in the hall saying, well, wait a minute, and as I think about it, the majority of the people that park downtown park under a monthly parking fee. That's going to result in a higher parking fee for people that work here in City Hall and wherever they work downtown if they bring a car. So I just like to say that we need to really think about that, because we're going to be taxing people that have already gotten their insurance raised and everything else in this building, as well as anybody else that works downtown that has a vehicle that if they have to park here, it's going to result in higher parking fees. It's just something I wanted to mention.
Okay. I believe we have
I do want to make sure that we just discuss how this is going to affect the GO bond. I want to echo that sentiment too. That's a very important measure that we need to include in our discussions in the next day or two. I'm a little bit wanting to just make sure that we've looked at this from all angles, and that's a very important one.
Okay. I would like to correct something about Prop S, so that we're, in my opinion, working for some factual information. When Prop S was passed, it indicated the monies and the amounts of money, and generally what it was supposed to be for. We took it up on the committee to do the details. That is to determine, as you say, the deliverables, the focus area, and we attempted initially, I was chair of the committee when it first happened that first year, and we attempted to, I don't, you weren't on the committee at the time, but we even brought in professionals from UMSL and others who talked about the best types of programs, the best models in the country for reducing crime, and they identified, if you're really seriously talking about reducing crime, you really need to have programming for youth that also affects the families, and the earlier you get them, the better, that it's a long-range and long-term process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight when you talk about crime prevention as opposed to policing. But we had an additional responsibility, and that was the whole political piece of it. Do all the people write letters of support? But that became a question that you typically don't have to answer when you deal with proposals. To what extent should the committee be involved? To what extent should all the people be involved in the process? So there were lots of technical issues that had to be responded to and answered beyond simply the deliverables of the agencies that are running the program. By the time my tenure ended, we hadn't answered all of those questions, but the first year, well, we had answered the majority of the questions. We had not gotten to all of the deliverables in the way we would like to have gotten to. But the first year, the monies were allocated. The entire, from my remembrance, the entire $1 million was allocated the first year and has not been since then. Is Paul Payne here? Yeah, if you remember, I believe you have a recollection that we did the first year allocate the entire $1 million. That's correct. Then after that, it began to be cut because of problems with the budget and other political reasons. So I just wanted to put that out there so that we are speaking from more factual information and not just anecdotal information of what actually happened. We even passed a resolution at that time that said all the people should not write letters of support. They should not be members of the organizations that are applying. We did several points in that resolution to make it a more fair and open and transparent process. I don't remember if you were here at the time, but that we did pass it at that time, the resolution.
Yeah,
You think you were here? You were
Yeah,
here.
because I
Okay.
supported the resolution.
Right, right.
But I appreciate your clarification. And it has gotten, and the program has changed, and it's doing what it's supposed to be doing now.
Yes. Okay, then I believe we have a few older people who are not on the committee. If there are no other questions from members of the committee, we'll take up Alderman, give Alderman Moore an opportunity, and then the others. Alderman Moore, you had a question?
The last 7 murders in this city happened in my ward. The women that were killed, the young man, babies being left. People are losing their lives, and we're talking about taxing people concerning getting more police. We're building a $2 billion stadium for losers, and people are losing their lives. We can get ballpark village money, we can get arch money, but people are losing their lives in my community. And what I want to say to the chief, I consider you a friend, but it shouldn't be selective. No one should be murdered, but it should not be selective press conferences. I'm waiting on you to come to the 2 young ladies that was killed. If you came, I didn't see you, about the 2 young ladies that's been murdered. And I want to know, what is it about the major case squad? Do they have more, how would I say, I wouldn't say they're smarter, but they're able to solve that crime with the young man with the car. And we haven't got any of these murders. If we have, then I haven't heard about them, the 7 in my ward. And we're talking about taxes. My community and my constituents asked me to come down and ask to sponsor this bill, can we opt out of the taxes because we're not being provided the service for the taxes that we pay. You see me on with the weeds 7 feet tall. That brings about crime. 1,242 empty buildings, that brings about crime. 1,700 vacant lots, that brings about crime. We need the whole 150 police officers in the 4th ward. 53. It's a ward going wild, and it is out of order. Sam, you keep promising me the hot spotting. They set one of your cars on fire on St. Ferdinand. They beat the car up on Hammett. It's not working. I need more visibility, just like any other downtown, southtown, any town. We should be talking about one St. Louis, but we know better that it's not one St. Louis. That is not, we're not being treated fair, and they sent me down there. I'm not on this committee, but I come down to let you know that we are not willing to pay any taxes for anything when you are building a $2 billion stadium, and when someone get killed, I see you on TV say more patrol and more visibility. I want the same thing, and I've been asking for cameras, Patrick, for the longest. I've got $200,000 saved for cameras. You told me to wait on cameras. I heard that they got some sophisticated cameras out, but no one has contacted me yet. The cameras will help us out as well. I had cameras before Antonio French. I was an alderman before Antonio. And I've been asking about the cameras, but I don't have cameras in my ward, and they'll help us out, because if you can't patrol it, I sit on my porch, which is a no-no. I sit out on my porch, and I haven't seen, I've been counting, haven't seen a cop car pass by my house yet this year to patrol. And I'd like to know what is going on. We're not being serviced. We don't want any part of this. And I know you, I consider you a friend, but this is strictly business. And I think that we should be more proactive. I think that we're reacting to Ferguson, Baltimore, and this is sensationalism. We have to sit down and get it ironed out. Maybe we can go to those people who want to build these stadiums and ask them for some money, put some of that money on policing and making sure that our city is all right. It's not just about downtown or southtown. It's about the whole city of St. Louis, and we need to be serviced, and we're not being serviced. And you've heard me say it before, that we live in third world conditions in that ward. It is unacceptable, 7-foot tall grass. And my slogan always is that we live like the Flintstones compared to the Jetsons. Yabba dabba do, but we're not having a gay old time. We're having a horrific time. It is unacceptable in there, and I need all of those police officers, and I want to know how you're going to distribute those police officers. It should be based on need, that my ward is a ward in need, the problem that we have, so I should get all of those officers.
Chief, before you answer, I know part of those questions are not directly on Board Bill 54, but we'll give you the opportunity to go ahead and respond.
Be brief.
Okay, thank you.
So just to be clear, Alderman, Ronnie Robinson met with you within the last week, and we talked about some of the enforcement strategies that we're going to start in your neighborhood next week. Did Major Robinson not meet with you to talk about that? Because I have heard you, and I agree with you that there are many pockets that are challenged throughout the city, and yours is one of them, and we're coming there. The same way that we've done in other parts of the city. Alderman Boyd, Alderman Williamson, Alderman Cohn, Alderwoman Ingracia, the same way. We're going to bring our hotspot resources in there, and we're going to bring the city resources with us afterwards. So just to be fair, we've had that conversation, haven't we, with Major Robinson? So I've heard you, and we're going to address that. The police officers, every alderman that was here Thursday last week, expressed a need and a concern and a desire. The officers that we're talking about today go to those districts. I'm not putting them in specialized units or pockets or hiding them. They go to those districts. And then the idea was, and if we grow the plan to scale, to have enough officers in each district where the captain can go into your problem areas, can go into Alderman Carter's or Alderwoman Green's areas and do that. And then we still have the resources from the top, the citywide resources, to go in and do things. So we agree. Pockets, go where the problems are. Rick Rosenfeld from UMSL agrees. Hotspot policing, hot people are the answers. Go to where the problems are. The other thing about cameras, the police department heard you. They heard Alderman French, they heard this committee, and have built the infrastructure to be able to take a camera network throughout the city and bring it in and use it as a crime-fighting tool. Instead of having 28 disparate systems, 50 disparate systems, 100 disparate systems, we're building the backbone, the network, to bring cameras in from any alderman. Right now, we met with Alderman French yesterday about his cameras. I heard him loud and clear. Alderwoman Ingracia, heard her about her cameras. We're bringing them in. Now is the time to have a camera conversation. The infrastructure wasn't there 6 months ago. It's there this month. We rolled out our real-time crime center last month. You're 30 days into the conversation. You're right on topic.
Sam, you know that my ward is 99.99% black. I have about 4 white constituents in my ward. They said it was an epidemic of heroin on the south side. My ward has been infested with heroin trafficking. We already have the problem of heroin trafficking. Seemed to not be a big deal because black lives do matter. But now I've got an infestation of white people coming over, shooting heroin and selling heroin in my most precious part of my neighborhood, which is the Dick Gregory Estates. A lady called me and asked me, did I send someone to look at some houses? I decided to get on my bicycle and ride to see what was going on. And there was a car that they had described. And when I drove up to the car, one guy was in a nodding position with the syringe in his arm. The other one had a spoon cooking up the heroin. And I said to them that the police had been called, and they almost ran over me trying to get out. While they were exiting in a fast pace, a white lady was coming in an SUV. They said something to her. She made a U-turn and come out. That is the most oddest thing you want to see. Is like taking the stripes off of a pinto horse, the spots. It is ridiculous what we have over in that neighborhood. I need more patrol. I want to see you say in your press conference that we're going to get more visibility because my people are listening to you. We need more visibility and more patrols in the 4th Ward. And also I want you to say that you're going to give us 50 of those officers. I won't take them all.
All right.
Okay. Thank
you. Again, going back to that point, we have talked to you within the last 2 weeks about our strategy about coming into your ward. And if I'm wrong, tell me. But,
come on, man.
But we've had that conversation, haven't we?
But you need to come on, Sam.
So we've had that conversation.
I had the last 7 murders in my ward, and I need you to come on. You know, you've been promising me the cameras. You've been promising me coming, but I don't want anybody else to die. I need you to come on now. Come on, Call them now, get on
And
your
what was,
cell phone
and
and tell them to
just
come on.
to be honest, what was the conversation you had with Major Robinson about when we were going to start?
That you're coming.
Monday. Monday.
When?
Monday.
Monday.
So did you meet with Ronnie Robinson, Major Robinson, in the last week or two to discuss that? So I've heard you. And so you portray that we're not listening. We are listening. And we are understanding the problems that you have and working with you. Cameras. I heard this committee, and the committee said, we need a comprehensive camera strategy instead of having multiple approaches. I heard you. We built it. In the last month, the switch just got turned on. So I hear you. I understand your frustration because I'm frustrated too. But we're working together.
Okay, we're going to have a question from a member of the committee, Alderman Carter.
I don't even think that this question is for you.
I'm sorry. Just one more.
Alderman, where you had another question?
Yeah, I had one more question.
And this is on Board Bill 54?
It's going to be very fast.
Okay, then.
I think that you should take Jerry Lakeshaw and put him back in the drug task force, Ronnie Robinson on gangs, and put Rocky Jones on homicide. We have a problem with gangs, and that gang problem is that on gang day, the 4-4 gang group have block off a city street and party all night and day in the 4400 block of Co-Brilliant, and at 1723 North Billups, they have gang day, and they celebrate themselves. And we can't get into one little park we have. We have one park that's called Rumble Park. We call that Walgreens Park because you can buy pharmaceutical drugs there. And at Tandy, it's like the casino. They shoot more dice than the casino queen. I need that patrol. I need some help over there, Sam. I appreciate it.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, Alderman Bosley, you had...
Well, I had planned not to say anything, but I need to let you know that over there in that 5th district, in particular in the Hyde Park area, the crime is so low over there. And I hate to say that with these televisions because the guys who are doing this stuff over in the 4th Ward may head over there in the 3rd Ward.
We're coming.
And the police over there hardly, you can, let me say, it's hardly you can sit out there on your porch 15 minutes and you don't see a police car go by over in there. They've done an excellent job over in there. And over in zip code 63105, by golly, I mean, I feel like sometimes I'm out Ladue. I see people sitting on their front porches over there. I just want to compliment what the police have done over there in that area. I don't want them to feel that it's so safe over there now they can all run over to Sam Boer's ward. We still need them to pass by over there, but I just want to compliment them, what they've done over there in the Hyde Park area and also in the O'Fallon area and also in the Fairgrounds area. They've done a heck of a job over there.
Alderman, I thank you, and I want 79 neighborhoods in the city to feel exactly that way. So that's where, and if we have to go one by one, we'll go one by one, but I want 79 neighborhoods in the city to feel that way. Thank you.
Okay, Alderman Carter, and then...
Chief, this question isn't for you. I think it's more towards Paul Payne. How many officers were hired off of the Prop S funding?
Well, the current authorized is what, 2?
Oh, 250?
No, 1250 is authorized. We're under that.
Yeah, it's about 1250, the entire authorization. How it breaks up, you've got, I don't have my budget stuff in front of me, about 3 million in allocated towards that account.
Okay.
So,
Well, no, I was just trying to get a pick of how many people we actually hired off of that off of those funds.
I mean, it'll vary each year, but you've got about $3 million there, so that's
Okay.
a significant
Okay.
dollar. But you'll see that when we get into the budget, you can see it.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, Alderman Carter.
Thank you. This question's for the chief. Chief, assuming this committee were to pass these various bills and then the votes went your way on the floor, what's the absolute soonest you could have this first group of officers, which I believe you indicated earlier would be about 80 maybe in the first year? What's the soonest they could hit the streets?
So what I would, first, let's just talk about the process. If this passed, we'd have to come back with an appropriation through Ways and Means, through E&A. The appropriation is done. Once that's done, I can start the hiring process. Depending on the depth of the pool of candidates that we have, probably 3 months and 6 months to get started, 3 months to get them hired, 6 months for the academy. They're out in about a year, maybe a little bit more.
Okay, well, obviously, assuming we pass these bills, there still has to be a public vote. So if the public vote passes.
So let's say 9 to 12 months after the appropriation happens.
Okay.
So that won't happen until after the public vote, which is August. If it is August, probably a year from now.
A year from August.
Yeah, so a year from now.
Okay.
About a year from now. We start to see the first group start to come out. And I can run an academy of between 35 and 40, but I can run 2 academies that simultaneously are, staggered slightly. So I can run 80 people through the academy at a time. I have capacity to do that.
Great, thank you.
Okay. There's no other questions from the committee on Board Bill 54. We're going to hold that and begin the discussions on the others. You had another question? Which other bill did you want to take up at this time?
51?
51. Let's take up 51. Now, I know they're all very much connected to one another. So let's see how we go with. That's my plan, too. We're holding 54 at this point. Let's go with 51.
Okay. Board Bill 51 is the red light camera fund. And currently, Board Bill 51, they're estimating a 3.5.
You can hold for a second. Let's give them a moment to move there.
Pieces, man.
You need to change that too. Let's take a 3-minute break. 5 minutes, okay.
They really do a good job on camera.